Hello and welcome. This is Future Mohammed editing the podcast. I would like to apologize about the audio quality. This is our first time recording a podcast, and thus there will be some mistakes here and there. Please be patient and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to our podcast. Today we're going to talk about the topic that is social media controlling our societies. But since this is a series of podcasts, we're going to have three episodes. This episode, we're going to focus on the social media algorithms. My name is Mohammed.
My name is Louis Philippe Duval. And I'm Mohammed Saad Qadri.
All right, so first of all, we do have specialist books for our course, of course. One that I am doing right now is called Race After Technology. And to summarize it a bit, it just talks about a new gym code. And that new gym code basically examines the intersection of race and technology in the modern digital tools. The author refers to the way of discriminatory design perpetuates racial biases under the guise of neutrality and efficiency within technology systems. Benjamin, which is the author, is a professor and an African American studies, and she unpacks how technologies can reflect and exacerbate existing racial inequalities. Uh, your guys' book is a bit different. It's antisocial algorithm. So do you want to tell me about it?
Yeah, so the book that we chose to read, me and Philip, we chose to read Anti-Social Media, How Facebook Disconnects Us and Undermines Democracy. And essentially, the main idea that Siva is trying to communicate is that basically, while Facebook says it unites us, it actually does the opposite. It actually serves to undermine our faith in the institutions that are already established, and it essentially like drives a wedge between us. And this is done through many ways, such as the bubble filter, biases, how they collect data, and many other ways for sure.
All right, and there is a third book that we are doing in the course. It's called Weapons of Math Destruction. This book is authored by Cathy O'Neill, and she delves into the dark side of big data. It explores how the use of mathematical models and algorithms are used often to perceive and objectify unbiases in the algorithms. O'Neill is a data scientist and a mathematician. She argues that many of the algorithms used in areas like finance, policing, and employment screening are opaque and unregulated black boxes, which makes decisions that can have serious consequences on people's lives. These models are the weapons of math destruction, as she calls them. She refers to powerful algorithms that use data to model and predict behavior, but which are flawed by biases embedded in the data they process. All right, so those are the three books mainly we're going to talk about in this podcast. We're going to start by talking about the mechanism of social media algorithm. So I'll explain a bit of the basics using the weapons of math destruction. So while weapons of math destruction is exclusively focused doesn't exclusively focus on social media algorithms, it does offer insights that can be applied to understanding their basics in the context of content delivery and user engagement. Social media platforms typically use complex algorithms to determine what content to show to each user, with the goal of maximizing engagement and keeping users in the platform for as long as possible. And this goes through few steps. There is the data collection, there's a user profiling, there's content ranking, there's engagement optimization, there's feedback loops, and there is testing that is done for each user, and there are economic incentives as well to keep the users on hand. Those are some of the things that Cathy O'Neill talks about in the Weapons of Math Destruction regarding social media exactly. Moreover, uh, in my specialty book, The Race After Technology, Ruha Benjamin introduces the concept of the new Jim Code in her book. The concept builds the historical legacy of the Jim Crow laws, systemic policies that enforce racial segregation and equality in the United States. The new Jim Code refers to the way technology, particularly algorithmic decision making, can hide, speed up, deepen, and entrench discrimination. And that's done through biased algorithm, content moderation, advertising and visibility, surveillance and policing, and economic exploitation. What about you guys' book? What do we have on mechanism social media?
So for us, instead of sort of giving a brief overview of the mechanism, it sort of kind of dives into little subtopics, I guess, of each different mechanism that is in there.
That's right.
So essentially, we can start with the pleasure machine, which is essentially it goes on to talk about how users essentially get some type of pleasure from using these platforms. So, for example, the example that was given in the book was about the Candy Crush, which is when the author is on a plane and he notices a variety of people just on their phone playing Candy Crush, getting some type of like emotional like invokement out of it. And another one that they introduce is the surveillance machine. So how we are actually being surveilled by social media. So one thing that I feel a lot of people don't know is that if you're carrying a phone or any type of device like such as that, you're automatically an agent of surveillance.
Yes.
What I mean by that is you're automatically being tracked just by having a phone and a camera. And this also adds on to people posting photos as it tracks your location, people you tag. Um, and typically it seems harmless until someone with bad intention comes into play because it can be used to harass people and do stuff like that. And often what I think is it also allows people to like accept terms without actually knowing what they're signing up for.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And there are also many other things that he dives into, such as the benevolence machine, which just assumes that people are always going to act in goodwill, which is obviously not indicative of society. And we have the protest machine, which is how propaganda and stuff gets promoted, and how protests come to arise from the use of Facebook.
Social media, yeah.
Then we have politics machine, which obviously dives into politics and how politics becomes a big part in social media. And we're going to go over an example of that just later on. And the rest it goes over is again just the disinformation machine, which is again you need to verify what sources you're using and if the sources like the information you're getting is actually accurate or not. And again, says the last section that it talks about is the nonsense machine, which is just again kind of going off disinformation and just like the nonsense you gain from social media.
I agree, yeah. That's exactly what we covered.
All right, so we could move on to the next point that we have. We're going to talk about biases and discrimination. So I will begin by referencing my book, which is Race After Technology. It delves into the ways in which technology can perpetuate and even exuberate racial and socioeconomic inequalities. And some of the points that Ruha Benjamin points out is that there's lack of transparency. So many of these algorithms are black boxes, meaning their inner workings are not transparent to the people they affect or to the regulators. This opacity can make it difficult to challenge or even understand the ways in which they may be perpetuating inequalities. Another point is that the new Jim Code. Benjamin introduces the concept new Jim Code, describes the way tech design often reinforces and hides racial discrimination. And last point is the surveillance and control. Technologies such as facial recognition are more likely to misidentify people of color, leading to potential false accusations and a disappropriation impact on these communities. Furthermore, technologies that are supposed to provide services can often be used to monitor and control marginalized populations more intensely.
Just adding on to that, the concept of being racially like biased that was evident in coded bias, which is what we watched.
Yeah.
It can be seen through various facets, such as Joy putting on a mask for the computer to recognize her, and I can definitely see it being very negative in society because people can just, for example, the case where we're looking at people using AI in sentencing cases,
Mhm.
that could be very judgmental for someone of just being innocent, being accused of something they didn't do just because an AI racially profiled them that way.
Yeah, and also adding to that, when in the documentary from Coded Bias, they also talked about how in Britain they're using AI to basically profile people to determine if they have committed a crime using AI. And this is an issue because the AI is very well known to misidentify victims, especially disproportionately people of colors and minorities. And this can lead to people that didn't actually commit a crime being, uh, you know, potential victims of police brutality and being falsely accused of crimes they didn't commit. Um, yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely, because my book also talks about policing and surveillance, right? Mostly it covers predictive policing tools, and those tools are like used on minority neighborhoods to kind of just like, yeah, like give a proportion of how much crime might happen in that area.
Yeah.
My book actually even talks about how this system was devolved from no, it evolved from a system that's used for earthquakes. So like the idea of using regional segregation and like grading was done for earthquakes, but now it's been used for policing and surveillance as well.
Yes.
We're gonna talk more about the bias in the next series, or sorry, next episode of the podcast. So let's move on to another point, that is democracy, public discourse, and misinformation. So, what does anti-social media talk about it in terms of democracy and whatnot?
So again, we talked about how politics can often be influenced by
Yes.
social media,
Mhm.
and I think you have an example that you want to go over.
Yeah, so essentially, the team of Trump used Cambridge Analytica. They hired Cambridge Analytica, and essentially, what Cambridge Analytica did is that they have conducted a research on, and they've collected millions of Facebook profiles about people without their consent, which is very bad. It's very unethical to collect the profiles of people without their express consent. And what they've done with this data essentially is that they've used this data to specifically target people. So what they've built is a map of the potential ideology of certain areas in the United States and who might be voting for the Republicans or the Democrats. And they've used this data to sway votes from someone that might have voted Democratic to a Democrat to a Republican. So that's what Cambridge Analytica did in a nutshell.
And that's very harmful to society as well.
Yeah, and also the democracy, which is the fundamental basis
it,
of our
it fully just undermines democracy at that point. It just
of our
fully
society.
influences people to believe in a certain way, and essentially produces propaganda upon them and like influences them to believe in that. And that's just, I feel, one of the ways that it affects democracy. Again, through government surveillance, through corporate surveillance, through everything. I think democracy can be infected in a lot of different ways.
Mhm. Do you guys think that us as Canadians, we are affected by those manipulation tactics?
Oh,
Of
for sure,
course, of
for sure.
course.
These tactics exist everywhere. Like one of the things in the chapter I read about the attention machine was that pretty much anywhere you go in the world, like there's no space in the world that is safe from like like trying to get your attention, basically. So I
As
think
long as you have an internet
yeah, like
connection,
anywhere you
are
look,
a potential victim.
like you go outside, look at some graffiti. It's always trying to put some message at you. Like there's so many advertisements on buses everywhere, and they all serve to sort of influence you and kind of sort of undermine your democracy by influencing you.
Yes, and also these advertisements, because they're very directed because of the bubble filter, they're very targeted to individual people, which on the surface might seem like a good idea because maybe we would get recommendations for products that we might need. But actually, this is a very disingenuous way of doing advertising because this basically targets individual, and they can use these tools to sway votes. They can know someone's background and what someone's beliefs are based on their search histories, based on the kind of news that they cover, their anything that they look on the internet through those social media platform. and they would know the kind of person that you are and just how much information they have to advertise to you to make you sway in a specific way that they would want.
It's scary to think that AI essentially kind of knows us better than we kind of know ourselves, because
Okay.
it essentially tracks everything that we've been through. Like at certain points in our book, it basically says it has acclimation of data to the point where it could literally like see every address you've visited, every email you've used, every landline, cell phone, nicknames, social profiles, networks. It could just know everything about you, and we probably aren't even aware that we're signing out these rights, these big corporations.
Yeah, no, like it feels like social media fits into the definition of weapons of mass destruction, as
Sure.
Cathy O'Neill points out. Because the main points of weapons of mass destruction is that we have opacity of algorithm, we have a scale and damage, which is, yes, social media can do a lot of damage. There is erosion of accountability. Yes, like we could, like it could contribute to the erosion of accountability. Decisions that are once made by humans and thus could be questioned or appealed are now made by mathematical models, because everyone's like has a different profile using AI models, right?
That's right.
And someone could argue that it does give or encourages inequality and polarization. So it fits definitely into the points, like it is a weapon of mass destruction.
For sure, and the fact that again, it's kind of like left upon the AI itself. Like even as programmers, we couldn't understand what it's doing.
Yes, it's
and that's a big limitation for it. It's a huge black box, and it basically does what it wants, and we just assume that it's doing what like it's supposed to.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. So, and regarding misinformation, what do we have about it in social media? Like, of course, we follow the news through social media, right? But I feel like it has a lot of power, especially in Canada right now.
Oh, for sure. I think social media is one of the biggest tools. Like social, like information warfare. I think is going to be like one of the biggest things in the next coming years.
If not today too.
Yeah, for sure. Like for example, like you go on your phone, you might be more likely to believe like a post that you follow versus like an actual like credited source.
So would you think that you know how news are kind of blocked right now in Canada for social media? Do you think we are protected from misinformation, or are we even falling more into misinformation?
I think this will lead us to falling more into information, because
I would agree.
If we're not getting the information that we need that's from credible sources, we're going to rely on sources that aren't as valuable or as accurate, and so we might be persuaded to believing what like a false accusation or statement they made.
Yeah, because of the bubble filter, right? Like that tracks every conversation that we follow or interact with on social media. Then, because of these, the algorithm would suggest to us more of the same content. So, let's say that you are, if you have certain political beliefs, then you're more likely to see those political beliefs. Or if you have certain other beliefs, like the current wars that are going on around the world with Russia and Ukraine, or Israel with Palestine and Hamas, then these kind of tools can be used to um, to spread false information, basically because of we don't have any social medias allowed anymore on our social platforms, which also leads to the decrease in credibility that we have. But after that, we also have had a lot of loss in credibility, because now the news are spread through talk to talk kind of way, instead of from an official media source that's accredited to spread, valid information that's verified, right?
The way I see it, there is a bit of manipulation, because if we're not getting news from social media, that means we are getting it from TV sources, for example, now. And all the TV channels, news channels are kind of
bias.
They have bias, but they are owned by one company. So if that one company decided to put some misinformation, now everyone is falling under that umbrella and is misguided in a way, because we can't see those social media posts anymore.
Sure. But I would even go further than that and say that even with the easy access to accredited information that's valid and verified, because of the bubble filter and the potential bias that people have when they do search on their phone, Facebook, any social media platform. Those interactions would predict future interactions. So even with the availability of a lot of accredited information, we still suffer from this bubble filter effect that our past biases affect our future biases.
For sure.
Okay. And this also takes us to another point. The next point in our schedule is the surveillance, data privacy, and user manipulation. So we did kind of talk about it in the previous point.
Yep.
Yeah.
But in terms of manipulation, is there something specific to social media?
I guess the biggest thing that we can cover is a lot of our articles talked about this. One of the articles we read was the rise of social algorithm. Content creation by Facebook introduced an ideological bias. And the article essentially communicates that social media does, in fact, and specifically Facebook, does influence an ideological bias, and that is through the bubble filter. And for those who don't know, the bubble filter is basically Facebook sort of assigning you a profile, and it basically keeps track of posts that you might have liked or interacted with or viewed, and essentially remembers them and essentially tries to integrate them into your feed. So basically, to keep you more hooked and engaged with the content that appears.
And to prevent future interactions with the platform.
Yeah, for sure. And another thing is basically the
No, for sure. Like I see what you mean. Like for example, invasive data practices are seen in social media, right? So to refine the algorithm itself, companies often collect vast amounts of data on individuals, and sometimes without even their explicit consent or knowledge.
Such as Cambridge Analytica.
Exactly. This can include not just demographic information, but also behavior, location, and even biometric data.
And sometimes even the specific messages from the users that they might have collected. So they might know you on a very personal basis.
Yeah, so this also gets into the data security issue as well, because the more data is collected, the greater risk of data breach.
For sure.
So if one of these companies have data on everyone and they get hacked, basically everyone's information now is in someone's computer in China now. So like
everyone's psyche is on the internet.
For sure.
Exactly. So
major breach of privacy.
this is one of the things that falls under the surveillance and the data privacy. For manipulative practices, I feel like there is targeting and profiling that happens in social media.
Yes.
Algorithms can use personal data and profile individuals and make predictions about their behavior, which can then be used to target them with specific content, ads, services in a way that manipulates their actions.
For sure. Again, this is another thing one of our articles talked about again. Essentially falls in with
the
bubble filter again. And essentially, this article basically tried to conduct research across three popular platforms. So the first one was YouTube, second one was Reddit, and the last one was a random one called Gab. Now, Gab is basically like a very small platform that supposedly pushes left wing content.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons they chose it for the experiment. So the way they conducted the experiment is by having three accounts. One of them would have no interaction with the extremist content, one of them would have medium interaction with it, and one of them would have like the most.
Okay.
And essentially through a specific time period with Reddit and YouTube, they were able to interact with different extremist content, and see if it would provide more extremist content over time. And in the case of YouTube, actually, they did find that it did in fact promote far right wing content.
Yeah.
And with Reddit, however, they found that it was a lot more neutral, actually, which is surprising but it makes sense at the same time because you instead of promoting extremist content, it really goes by what you click on Reddit.
Yeah, Reddit is considered to be the front page of the internet, right?
I think it's the most neutral out of all the platforms because it kind of gives you everything and it doesn't force things on you, essentially.
Would that mean there is a sort of anonymity that happens with Reddit, do you think?
Yes and no, I would say.
Okay. So like, does Reddit collect information to use it for ads? I don't think so. Like,
Uh,
there aren't targeted ads
I,
on
I'm
Reddit, for
sure there
example.
must be. I'm
It's
sure there must be a way, but like it
potentially
probably
yes.
isn't like evident to us.
It's not
Mhm.
the so the one thing I would say with Reddit is it's not as pervasive as a platform like YouTube
Mhm.
or even Facebook, but it's still very much predictive in a sense. From my own personal experience with Reddit, when I use the app,
Mhm.
I get very targeted ads.
Interesting.
So yeah, so maybe the content itself might be neutral, so that
Mm,
might be a
Mhm.
good case for why
mm,
AI can bring some positivity or can be a
mm.
a good you know
I think the main function of just platforms in general. I think they're made under the idea that the user is going to be benevolent. So like he's going to be of good faith and he won't do anything
yes
wrong, which is obviously not indicative of society.
no
Mhm. Yeah, no, so something about manipulation also that I saw very weirdly.
Mhm.
On October 20th, there was an article given by posted by The Guardian, sorry.
Mm,
And basically it says that, quote, Instagram apologizes for adding terrorist to some Palestinian user profiles.
mm.
So,
mm,
end quote. Basically,
That's shocking. That's shocking to hear.
I found that out in last week, but it is very shocking to see that it is trying to manipulate users
Users, yeah.
yes
into saying that everyone who supports a specific uh, people
narrative
narrative, they are
hmm
terrorists in this case, because the AI of Instagram decided that translating from Arabic to English, when I had Palestine in the word, now it means terrorist in English. So this is one thing that I feel like is manipulated with social media.
Again, this is just another example of how information is sort of used as warfare as well.
Yeah,
yeah
everyone is under the mercy of those social media algorithms.
For
Like,
sure.
yeah
if they decided to put a narrative out, I'm pretty sure everyone's gonna,
Because
for some reason, be affected by that
at the
narrative.
end of the day, what we see on our content or our feed is essentially all like made by AI.
Mhm.
So it influences what we're gonna see
Mhm.
already, and I feel like it's only gonna get worse over time.
hmm
Yeah, so speaking of which, now we're going to move on to how we regulate the responses of the role in the tech industry. We, as computer scientists, we have a responsibility that when we go out to the field, we need to have specific ethics in mind when we're coding our programs.
So just kind of going off that,
Mhm.
again, we're going back to the article where they conducted the three count
Mhm.
search.
hmm
They actually provided some recommendations of how they could possibly improve their algorithms.
Mhm.
And so the first way that they introduced was essentially just removing any problematic content. What
yeah
that means is just like having a sort of like a filter or like limited features kind of or like a limited features kind of policy where essentially where if people like commit like like a hate crime or like
Mhm.
push some sort of
push
view,
extremist
they'll
views
get like
yeah
they'll get like some type of warning or like even some
Mhm.
account suspension.
hmm
um and another way, I guess, would just be to simply just remove those videos so that no one finds them in the
Mhm.
first place. The second recommendation that the person gave is sort of advertise more quality sources and credible sources more,
Okay.
rather than just random Facebook or like random pages that just might post nonsense essentially.
Mhm.
yeah I
Um,
agree
and essentially, like they should have fact checkers to even check that if like even if something is wrong, which I believe they have implemented now. There are a
Mhm.
little bit of fact checkers in Facebook, so they should definitely add that if they have not already. Another another recommendation that they gave was of just greater transparency between the public
Mhm.
and the company.
yes
I think that's one of the key things that would uh, provide the public with the information they need to.
Yeah, for
Is,
sure. Even in weapons of mass destruction, there are some pointers of regulating social media or any algorithm that is considered weapons of mass destruction. And transparency does fall under that. The
hmm
author calls for greater transparency in how algorithms make decisions. This is directly relevant to social media, where the algorithms determine that people see in their feeds are often proprietary and not publicly understood. And it also um, goes into accountability as well.
Mhm.
So there is an emphasis that there's the need for algorithm designers to be accountable for the impact of their
For
systems.
sure.
Uh, for example, if you decided as a coder you want to put a bias into your model, there's no one stopping you. So when that model does act on that bias, who's accountable at that point? Is it the AI model? Or is it us, the coders?
I think it would definitely have to be the coders. They're the ones who provide the bias data in the first place.
Yeah, of course. Well, we also have
I
well,
think also from the end of the platforms, they should be more transparent about how the information of their users are
mhm,
used, throughout their
Mm.
experience, but especially, during registration and all that. And whenever they have policy changes that any kind of policy that's done with algorithms such as AI that affects
mhm,
the data of the users and the personal information of users, that there's better transparency in how those changes are implemented instead of just having a very long terms and conditions
mhm,
uh, style type of you know page that would show you, if you read through the whole document, what specific changes are there. There should be
mhm,
more transparency throughout how the information is used and
mhm,
how it will affect the users in the future, and the type of accountabilities that the platforms can
mhm,
have in the cases of data breaches,
Mm.
so they can reassure that users are
mhm.
safe with their data on their platform.
Another thing I just want to add on is, again, like AI is obviously just something new. So I think there needs to be a lot more like further research done upon it. We have to
Mm-hmm.
basically be able to transform it like from not a black box to something that we can understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I think through further research, we'll be able to achieve greater transparency.
Yeah, of course. And also, lastly, I think we, as coders, we need to take ethical consideration into whatever we're making, right?
For sure.
Yes.
So even though there are biases around us and data sets are usually biased,
Mm.
I think we need to minimize that as much as we can.
Mm-hmm.
Social media companies are being urged to consider societal impacts of their algorithms,
Mm.
but is it up to their coders or is it up to the company itself to put those ethical consideration in there?
Mm.
And it is a question and a challenge for future coders and whoever goes into the field.
For sure.
Yes, for sure.
Uh,
However, I would say that the onus is slightly more on the platform itself, or in this case,
mhm,
companies like Facebook or
Yeah.
social medias, because even as a program, like a software developer, programmer,
Mm.
my ethical, concerns about how data is being processed might not be, listened to by
mhm.
the higher up management,
Mm.
and also people risk losing their jobs.
I feel like there's many ways to just place blame, place blame. Sorry. You could put it on coders or the corporate, or I think personally it should be like the data testers essentially,
Mm-hmm.
and because they're the ones who are basically like introducing like a bias, for example, into
Yes.
data and like essentially um, feeding the AI information that would make it biased or unethical in the first place. So I think those are the ones that should be responsible at the end of the day, because the company
Mhm.
is functioning basically under the same value that the person using it is again benevolent.
Okay, I see. Back to the users.
Mhm.
What recommendations do you guys have to maybe protect our uh, non-computer sciencey nerds users?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
how?
Honestly, one thing I would say is again just to verify and make sure you're getting your news from credible sources.
Mhm,
That's one big thing because a lot of what I see on specifically mine and like a lot of my friends is they have a lot of like BS news essentially.
mhm.
So a lot of nonsense that just comes up and they somehow actually end up believing it without doing any research. So definitely research is one of them.
Yeah, of course. Like there are many of like family group chats, for example, on WhatsApp,
Hmm.
right? And
Yes.
sometimes if they don't have verified news,
My
it
mom
could
sends me all of them. Yeah,
exactly. So like
Yes, it can
you,
really create an echo chamber within
for
these
yes,
sure.
servers.
exactly.
Yes.
Uh,
And then that's where you get the extremist content.
of course,
Exactly.
yeah. And also like we need to verify the companies themselves. Like there are some worries that TikTok, for example, is breaching our privacy data, and that's why it was blocked on politicians who work in the
It's
government
interesting
in the
that you bring.
U.S.
It's interesting that you bring TikTok up because I've actually had personal experience with this.
Okay.
One thing it was really weird. So essentially, I would be talking about like a specific topic, like a movie, for example,
Mhm.
and literally like the next day, I would like open TikTok and it would be something about that movie.
Oh,
So I
that's
definitely
great.
think the phone is like listening to us and surveilling us.
Yes.
Mhm.
Oh, yes. There's definitely some questionable things that platforms like TikTok especially are doing.
Mhm.
Mainly one of the concern is like where is the data going?
Sure.
And TikTok always, you know, reiterate that the data is stored in the United States, but there's always a concern that what if the Chinese government wants to have access to this data and use it in a way in for like warfare or
For
for
sure.
other ways that we would not anticipate.
Mhm.
Uh, and also, one thing about TikTok is like they collect a lot of data about us,
Mhm.
and because there's not a lot of requirement on the transparency of how they collect those kind of information
Mhm.
and data about us, that leads to them collecting a lot of data that would not be relevant, such as like maybe like the type of phone you're using,
Mhm.
the screen resolution, the type of processor you're using.
But it's just scary to know that the fact that they have all this data, even if it's
Yeah,
useless, they just know all these things about you.
they know all these things
Mhm.
about us, and the scary thing is like we don't know how they're going to use uh, our data in the future,
For
right?
sure.
I
Mhm.
like in the terms and conditions, they state that they can have access to see all our file directories, so they would
Mhm.
know they would have a map of our
Mm.
own phone and the individual file that we have on our phone.
That
So
brings me to another point, which is to always read the agreements before signing them.
Yes, but sometimes it's
yeah,
very.
Sometimes, yeah, that's the
Sometimes
thing.
it's like we're looking at
but
a
this is
100-page
I
agreements.
feel, yeah, most people just
but this
like
is
it's
why I
okay.
was saying that we need more, governments involved policies that require these platforms to
For
be
sure.
transparent about the type of information that they collect
Mm.
and to specifically state why they're collecting this
Mhm.
information about us and how they're going to use this data now and in the future.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
also say where this data is going to be stored. Uh,
Mhm.
Within reasonable bounds, but they could say that the data for the United States is stored within the United States on US grounds
Mhm.
and, state how they can mitigate data breaches and those kind of things for
Mhm.
US and Canadian users.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because the data before there was the Congress hearing with the TikTok CEO, it was stored in China and whatnot. So like
Mm.
only after that meeting with the Congress that they decided that uh, if you want to put TikTok in US, we need those servers to be in US grounds. Because
Mm.
there is, I think, laws in China that any company can be forced into giving up all their data if the
Yeah,
government wishes to in any case.
because in China, each company, in a way, belongs to the Communist Party
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
China. So there's this ownership and there's this requirement for disclosure of information whenever the Chinese government,
Mhm.
requests those information.
Mm.
And we don't know the outreach of those kind of policies.
Mhm.
While these policies might be okay in their own country, these kind of policies are not acceptable within U.S. grounds, and they create national security
Mhm.
issues for both the individual users but also government officials, because government officials are also on these social platforms and we
Mhm.
don't
Sure.
know how they use this data and we don't know if they can access it because they're not transparent about this kind of
Mhm.
information. We don't know if the Chinese government has a backdoor or a way to access our information,
Yeah, and
even if it's stored within US or Canadian crown.
something interesting about TikTok also is that apparently one of the developers came out and talked about having a feature that only developers and higher ups in TikTok headquarters can basically take any post and make it go viral in one click. So, for example, if you have government officials who post regularly on social media, like it feels like wrong
I don't
for
think.
TikTok to have that much power.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say the same thing. One like entity should not have that much like
Mhm.
power because again, with the assumption that people are benevolent, it's obviously not true. Again, like there'll definitely be some type of like, persuasion that will make him use that button, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, increasingly social media platforms are being used by people for political reasons, maybe for researching the political candidates, or maybe they're following a specific political candidate that they like, or maybe a congressional member that they like what they hear. And because there's no transparency about how this data is used and what kind of abilities these kind of companies that aren't located within the United States, especially, what kind of capabilities do they have on our data and how they can use it? And they can really, this is how they can really affect our democracy and hinder the political game. Yeah.
All right. So in short, um, we're telling our users that be careful of social media.
Be mindful.
Be mindful.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of power on social media, so don't believe whatever you see there on first glance.
Always do your research.
Do research. Make sure reliable sources are confirming all the news you're getting from there. And lastly, don't get TikTok, right?
Yeah, I think TikTok is
One, one tip of advice that I would also recommend users in general, just be careful about like the type of information that we're posting. For example, does Facebook need to know that we like a specific political party? Does Facebook need to know your favorite food?
I think that also introduces like again the bubble filter on someone.
Yeah, and also they can use these types of data, like in Cambridge Analytica, to form a psyche map of each state and provinces to affect our election. Right? They can really make individualized studies on us when we're giving out this information. So part of the onus is on the company, of course, but also we need to be mindful and careful as users about the type of information that we're letting these companies have about us.
For sure.
So one piece of advice that I would give is to always just think, why am I sharing this? And would I be okay if this data was used in an unethical way? And think about how the repercussions of posting images, posts, likes,
So to basically just like
any kind of interaction, how can it affect me personally in the future? And when we have analyzed this, you know, then this is when we can decide, okay, this is okay, I can post this. It's just a cat picture, or maybe I shouldn't voice my political opinion too much because that could really be used in a very negative way to influence our political
essentially just to
system.
Just to be aware that anything you post on the internet stays there forever.
Yes. And technically you don't own whatever you're posting on those
Yes.
public platforms. Like Instagram takes whatever post
Whatever
they
you
want,
post is with their servers.
goes to their servers, and they can do whatever they want with it. There's no limitations,
yeah.
of course. So just to wrap up today's podcast, we first talked about the mechanism of social media. We covered basics of the bias and discrimination. We're going to cover those mostly in the next episode, of course. We talked about the democracy, public discourse, and misinformation. We covered a bit in the surveillance, data privacy, and user manipulation. We talked about how to regulate responses in the tech industry, and as computer scientists, what is our role in this dilemma. We had some um, tips and recommendations to users and the general public, of course.
On how they can protect themselves.
So, lastly, of course, we're gonna talk about bias next time, but to tease that episode, do you guys think that there is bias within everything around us and all the algorithms, or do you think there is unbiased algorithm that you can point out or just call out, like.
I think everything has a bias because
Okay.
I think a lot of what the AI builds on is history,
Mhm.
and history rooted in history rooted itself has a lot of biases. It's
Mhm.
come through just racial and
Mhm.
a lot of different just arguments that happened in the past.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, same. And I would say with the previous wars that we've had, it's not the losers that wrote the history books, it's the
So
winners of the
winners.
war.
100%.
So there's always, a bias wherever we look, I think.
Mm.
Maybe we don't understand it. Maybe it's not a racial bias or a sexist bias,
Mhm.
but I think there is always some type of bias inherently in any kind of data set that we look.
Subtly.
And we have to look at how this kind of data set might have potential biases and how we can mitigate it.
All
Sure.
right. So we're gonna cover more on that next episode for sure. We're gonna thank our listeners.
Thank you,
Whoever
guys.
is
Thank you
listening.
very much for listening to us.
We mumbled for a long time, but hopefully you take informative notes from this podcast. On that note, we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
listening.